Hello to everyone watching live and to anyone listening back to this. So welcome to What Kind? This is episode 3. So we're looking at, today we're looking at what kind of change is good change. I'm Neve, I'm from Quickfire Digital, a digital transformation agency. And my sort of perspective on this is I studied change theories at university. So I'm coming from the theoretical and the practical side of things. So I'm going to hand over to Lou to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Lou. I am a culture and relationships coach. And so for this episode, I'm definitely coming from a coaching approach and focus, particularly. So my coaching style is existentialist coaching, which basically means how we look at the impact that change has on our sense of self and the relationships that we have. And then we've got Marie.
Great, awesome. Hello everybody, so I'm Marie Oakes. I am a former fashion designer and wellbeing expert. I'm going to come at it probably more from the personal point of view, how we all feel about change, because I'm quite interested in how, and probably most of us are interested in sort of understanding why some people thrive on change and why others of us resist it. I've definitely gone through a lot of change in my life and have embraced it and resisted it. And it's kind of, how do we change that? How do we learn to kind of embrace it? And how do we learn to become better and to, adapt to change? And like Lou said, it's kind of making it quite personal. It's basically taking us out of our comfort zone, really. I think that's what change does. And change, I know Lou is going to touch on this later, but, change is good and change is bad. And it can be really hard at times. It can be tough, but it is possible and it is worth it. So we're going to be talking about that today, and I'm going to be kind of sharing some of my experiences of change, good and bad, and then really looking at how we can move from thinking about change to doing change. And I think at the moment it's quite relevant because a lot of us have gone through so much change in the last 5 months, whether that's personal, whether that's through our business or whether through our work. And how that's kind of affected us. And I think that maybe a lot of us have, maybe want to make some changes. We maybe create better habits and behaviours for ourselves. And how do we sustain that? How do we make sure that we can still embrace that change and still go forward without having to compromise? And more from a well-being point of view. So and kind of I wanted to kick this off today with this question I wanted to ask the girls, and you can ask yourselves at home as well, is change means different things to different people. So let's start with you, Neve. If I say the word change, what does it mean to you?
Well, I automatically start thinking of theories because that's just been taught into me for so long, but I find change quite exciting, and I always have, and it's one of those things that it's a blessing in disguise, but it can also be a bit of a curse because not everyone reacts the same way. And I think sometimes when a change happens and I get really excited about it and start thinking, what can I do? And it's something that I've actually had to really learn, is that some people are going to see that as a bit insensitive almost sometimes. So when I'm, if there's in work, for example, if there's a big change going on, or we're changing process, or just small things that change. Business are changing every day, but I often kind of jump to the next step and think, okay, well, what can we do? What does that mean? What do I get to play with? But some people, that means completely changing their day to day, which is quite scary and quite intimidating for them. So I've had to sort of learn that although I find change exciting, not everyone does, and being sensitive to that. But yeah, I get quite excited about change, and I think I'm really lucky because I've always been in a position where I've never really had to go through any overly negative change. So it's not really, I've always seen it as a positive thing. But yeah, that's where I come from. What about you, Lou? What does it make you feel?
How you said that you've always seen it as a positive thing instantly makes me come back to that question that we've kind of been teasing out, which is it just about mindset? Is it, is the difference between good change and bad change just how you see things? And I feel like I'll end up derailing the whole conversation if we go down too much that route, as I tend to. What does change mean for me? I typically it's quite circumstantial, right? And so for somebody who works with others that looks at their sense of identity and their well-being, we you either fall into the camp of change is destructive, and definitely in my life prior to coaching and in a senior manager role, I was certainly one of those managers that people would go, are you just changing for change's sake? Like Neve, I loved that opportunity and being able to embrace. And I think there are those moments, so there's that metaphor around, if you've got a patch of if you've got a patch of land, a patch of dirt, you can do nothing with it, but in order to make anything grow from it, you do something with it. I'm rubbish at gardening, so I'm not going to go down that metaphor too much, but in order to nurture growth, you have to do something with it. And I definitely have worked with clients from the other from the other end of the scale, so the people who are scared of change, and also people who have just been stuck. And so this idea of change for me is around movement. And we're absolutely right that if we're just constantly moving without reflection, that in itself can be quite damaging, like letting me loose on a patch of land with nothing but a shovel. I'll just, it's a process. And so that idea around is change just a mindset kind of really fits in that idea of, do we only ever see the positives, and what do we miss out by just focusing on that? So quite multifaceted.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, Marie.
I think you did. I think it's an interesting one. I think made me think of a lot of things actually then, where you think of change in the sense of, when I think of change, I automatically go, oh my God, that's really exciting. But then a little part of me dies inside and goes, oh my God, I'm going to have to come out of my comfort zone, or I'm going to have to do something different. And then I get a very unsettling feeling. I know it's a good thing, and I want to push myself, but you can quite easily, restrict yourself and not embrace it and go, do you know what, I'm going to stick in my comfort zone. I'm going to stick to what I know. I'm not going to get hurt. I'm not going to get embarrassed. I'm not going to have any discomfort. And I'm going to stay where I want to be. Or you have the other element of that, I suppose, is people that want to change and they don't know how to change. And I think, that was a big thing for me. So I wanted to change for years. I knew my life was out of control and I was not looking out after myself properly. But I really wanted to change, but I didn't know that process. I didn't know, I suppose I was going to talk about like the stages of changes, if I may, of that I look back now and I think, I was kind of stuck in that first one for ages, whereas that's kind of pre-contemplation of, you're kind of aware that something's not right and you're aware that something needs to be changed, whether that's a situation at work or whether that's a situation with yourself, but you're not quite ready. I suppose the why isn't big enough yet for you to change. And then it goes to that kind of preparation where you're kind of, you're in that stage. And actually a lot of people kind of stay in that stage for a while where they think, I need to change, or I need to change something at work, or I need to change my job, or, I need to change the behavior of people treating me a certain way. And it takes a commitment really to kind of explore that. It takes a commitment to look at how you could do things differently. I know from not having bulimia anymore, not having that addiction and those patterns, it is breaking a patterns, not going out and have a drink after work every night. It is breaking those patterns. And I think it's then preparing yourself of how to go through that change, but also having a plan for it. So if I wasn't going to do that, what else was I going to do? How was I going to replace that with something? It's not necessarily a lifestyle choice, but you have to almost have a plan. It's like anything, you have a business plan. If you're going to do something, you have a goal. And I think kind of from a personal point of view, you kind of almost have to set those goals for yourself, because otherwise you're never going to move, you're never going to grow, you're never going to go forward. So I've kind of gone off a bit on tangent of what change means to me, but I think that can always be, I'm very passionate about that, and I work a lot of people with clients and people individually of moving them from what I want to change, but how do I? And I think that's a really powerful place to be, and a really powerful, if you can make that change, then you can go on and kind of sustain that. So yeah.
This might be putting you on the spot a bit, Marie, but if one of the people you worked with came to you and said, you know, I want to make this change, I want to launch my own brand, or I want to, you know, quit my job, or I want to, you know, something in their personal life, they've got the, you know, the business plan in place, they know exactly what they want the brand to look like and stuff. What's the next step? What do you think, there's anything that you can tell someone to do to prepare themselves for that change, other than the practical business stuff, but in themselves getting ready for that change? Or do you think it's something that people just have to accept and sort of figure it out for themselves? Or is there any advice you can give?
Yeah, there is. That's a really good question. Really, and actually, a lot of what I get asked actually is like, how do you move forward from that? What do I do? And I think it's self-protection. You know, I think sometimes we feel that's like a self-indulgent, you know, if we're launching a business, but you have to look after yourself. And I think it's, you know, every decision that you make is putting your well-being at the front of it. You know, if you think, if you're going to make a business decision, you know, is this going to harm me or is this going to help me? And that has to go back to the fundamental of that. And I think a lot of it is down to self-belief as well. You know, it's knowing, I suppose it's having that bigger drive and that bigger goal that's going to keep you going. I think it's like anything. I think the one thing with change, or if, you know, starting a new business or anything like that, is you don't know what it's going to be like on the other side. You don't know whether the pain and the discomfort is going to be worth it. So you have to trust that it will be, and almost have that belief and trust from others as well to help go on that journey with you. I think a lot of leaders and businesses are successful because they get people to buy into that vision, and they get people to buy into what they're trying to do. And a lot of that starts with that purpose. I think if you've got a strong enough purpose and, you know, a great heart, and it's very authentic, you're doing it very authentically, then, you know, you will be successful. You will have people that will come along on your journey with you. But a lot of it has to be, you know, that kind of self-belief. I think it's, you know, the self-criticism sometimes, or even, you know, especially as a creative, if you're putting yourself out there and, you know, for judgment and critiques, it's really hard to sort of bounce back from that sometimes. So it's always going back to go, okay, well, I believe in what I'm doing, and it's not for everybody. So it's having a really strong inner confidence, really, I suppose. And then maybe having, you know, a really good support network that's going to be around you to say, you know, not be yes people, to say, yeah, okay, and challenge you and go, is that what you want to do? Or actually, yes, this is a really good idea. So I think there's a lot of things that you can do, if that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely it does. I think that was really good advice.
Absolutely. And see, I'm now intrigued because Neve and I have said in the introduction that we're coming from this in completely different from different views, and so I'd love to hear from a change management, from an academic theoretical point of view, what that looks like, because for me the interest is the personal experiences that Marie has beautifully shared with us and some of the advice around that, and how does that translate up then into when we're working in those environments.
Yeah, so I mean, I won't bore everyone and go into too much detail about the theories and the theoretical change, but essentially there are so many different models and, you know, practices and theories, and essentially they're usually it's like a journey. So people will enter change. So if a change is happening, what usually, you know, when these theories were put together, the thought process was everyone starts at the same place and everyone ends at the same place. So they end with the change happening, and they start with being told about the change, and they'll go through these different emotions. So it's usually like frustration and depression, and then they go up to excitement, or they go through a stage of sort of, you freeze the situation you're in at the moment, you do the change, and then you like analyze it afterwards and go through it and make sure that everyone's comfortable with it. But the main thing that I sort of stress when I talk about these theories is that although these were put together, a lot of these theories are very old and don't sort of come into modern practices. But the main takeaway is that everyone enters at different places. There are no two people that handle change the same way. People might look on the outside that, you know, they're coming at it from the same angle, and they might be, but everyone's handling it differently. So no matter what model you apply to it or what theory you read through before you do it, you know, whatever steps you put in place, people are going to handle that differently. I mean, there are so many models, and essentially they all say that, you know, there are different stages, but the key thing is that people aren't going to enter it at the same place, and it's knowing that, and it's understanding the stages well enough. So one of the main models that I kind of like try and push to management is ADKAR, which is basically it's a really well-known theory in the space, but it's basically acknowledgement, desire. So it goes through stages, and basically just making sure that everyone wants to do it, everyone that goes through it, and if they don't want to do it, why don't they want to do it? Recognition, so saying to people, you know, even if unfortunately at the moment this isn't what's going to happen, this is what has to happen in the business, you know, and I recognize that this is scary for you, or you find it really exciting, which is amazing, but you need to sort of be, you need to keep everyone else in mind. And I know I've said about this, we spoke about this previously, but I find change really exciting. So we had a couple of months ago, we changed our project management system, and I looked at it as a fun new platform that I get to play with that's got loads of flashy bells and whistles, and I was really excited about it, and I was really like looking into the features and what could I do about it, and because it's actually something that I've been pushing for quite a while. But other members of my team were really, you know, sort of anxious about it and not wanting to change, and I couldn't figure out why. And I sort of said back to myself, okay, well, think about your theories and why are they feeling this way. But it was because they had to, so because my role was slightly different, they had to do the sort of manual switch over. So they had to take the projects from the old system and put them into the new one, because they didn't quite talk to each other well enough. So that's why they weren't looking forward to it, because it wasn't something new and exciting and sparkly. It was a job that they had to do that they didn't really have time for. So, you know, we had to sort of work it in, but it wasn't something that was new that they got to play with. It was a new task that they had to do. So they were looking at it in a completely different way to how I was looking at it. I was looking at it as a fun new opportunity. And for them, it would have been eventually, but that's not what it was. That's not how they went into that change. They saw it as something different and something new that they had to do on top of their role, rather than just something there to play with. So I said earlier that that's one of the things that I've kind of had to teach myself, is that although I find change very exciting, not everyone does. And I mean, I said earlier, but I'm really lucky that change has never been necessarily a bad thing for me, not in my professional life anyway. So I kind of need to bear that in mind when I go into things. But yeah, so essentially with the theories, there are loads of different ones, but whatever one you apply, whatever model, you know, you try and push all your staff through or push yourself through, you know, a lot of people like applying these kind of theories to their own life as well. It's not going to look the same for everyone. So although the models are great and they're a really good place to start, and I genuinely do recommend them and recommend looking into them if it's something that, you know, you're serious about. Yeah, it's definitely not, it's not the be all and end all, essentially. So people enter at different times.
So helpful, Neve. And actually from my point of view, really reassured that that's kind of where you're concluding from all of that work. Just because from a coaching angle, or at least from my practice, and so I've kind of talked about it on previous episodes, where it's an acknowledgement that we all come from different experiences and we have our own stories and how we get there, and that because it might not even be different individuals responding to change differently. Like we as ourselves might respond to change differently at different points, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Marie, where you've both embraced and resisted change. And I'm always really fascinated between, so the question that I'm kind of exploring at the moment is it actually different whether we have intentional change and unintentional change? Because in that story that you were talking about, Neve, for you, that was intentional change. It was project you wanted to, you know, that you were really excited about, that you pushed for and advocated for. But for your colleagues, it wasn't a change that they had put into place. So for them, that kind of unintentional change. And I think particularly in our context at the moment this year, you know, we're all experiencing this big unintentional change that we didn't most of us didn't predict, and that we acknowledged to different extents at different time points. And so I'm quite fascinated about the idea of, is it related to power and influence? If it's a change that you implement, do you feel like you're in more control of it? And do you feel more out of control if it's something that you feel like has happened to you? And so, yeah, I'm kind of interested in your points of view of how does that fit with how you see the world?
I think it triggers that flight or fight response almost, doesn't it? When something happens and you have to deal with it. I think it's one of those things that mindset does come into it, but also just practicality. You know, if something with COVID, people just had to change, realistically, whether they liked it or not, everything changed around us and we had to change with it. Businesses had to completely change their business models. People's roles at work completely changed. People stopped working. People had to go on furlough. You know, the business decided what was best for them, and people's lives completely changed. So I think I think mindset comes into it, but sometimes no matter how, you know, positive or negative you see a change, it's going to happen. You know, some things just have to change, and I don't think that's always a bad thing. You know, there are bad changes that happen, and that's never going to stop. But I think if you go into something thinking, you know, well, how can I make this work for me, or how can, you know, I make this a positive thing, and of course that's not applicable to every situation, but at least in terms of, you know, business models changing and, you know, changing your role at work, something like that. Yeah, if you go into it looking at it as an opportunity rather than, oh, this is happening to me and this is making me feel bad, like, it might make you feel bad, but if you always look at it as something that's negative, it's always going to be something negative. So it's kind of, I guess that's the way I would try and approach something like that. You know, if something was happening and I feel like, oh, this is happening to me, is okay, well, it's going to happen whether I want it to or not. I don't really have control over that, but I have control over, you know, how that affects me. Does that make sense? So like how, I think that's the only sort of, yeah, the only thing I could say on that. But it's not always, you can't always do that. You know, some things are just going to make you feel bad because they make you feel bad. But I guess if you can look at it from that response, and I guess the people around you will make a difference. You know, if your peers are, your colleagues are stressing out about it as well, or, you know, if it's in your personal life and, you know, you've really got anyone to support you, that's going to make a massive difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, it is about balance as well, isn't it? I think and it comes back to resilience. You know, I talk about resilience and you know, help people to kind of build their resilience. And I think sometimes change, you know, in the face of change, if we feel that we can handle something, then we feel much more powerful about it, especially if it's not within our control. There's a big thing about something not being within your control and learning to control what you can control, that kind of willing acceptance. And I think that's something that a lot of us really struggle with is, you know, suddenly it's like, oh, I've got no control over anything. And there's that panic and there's that anxiety, and that's where that stress comes from. But then it's trying to refocus yourself and kind of get that clarity and go, actually, look, I can't control this, but what can I control? And I think that's where the power and that's where the confidence comes from. But I think also it is building up that resilience. And I say this quite a lot, you know, you don't know how resilient you are until you need to be resilient. And I think actually many of us have learned so much about ourselves in the last few months and have realized, you know, we are stronger than we think. We have had to change and we've gone, you know what, you know, I handled that pretty well, or, you know, give yourself a pat on the back kind of thing. And I think it has enabled us to think differently and to push ourselves out of our comfort zone and think, God, you know, if I can get through that, what else can I get through? And I think that's where the power comes from. And I think that's amazing. I think that's brilliant. And it's not, you know, I've seen people have a really tough time, have been made redundant and you know, and had a really, really tough time, but then, you know, found a job at the end of it and now they're working again. And I suppose it puts a different perspective on it. And a lot of them are like, you know, God, I've gone through this and this has made me stronger. You know, one thing I ask myself is, you know, was it a good thing or a bad thing that I burnt out? I think it's a good thing because I've learned so much from it, because I've learned how to change and how to do differently and embrace it. So I think, like you said, you know, it is a positive thing and it is about mindset, and it's really looking at this time at the moment and thinking, you know, wow, you know, I did this, I did that. I homeschooled my kids and I got an okay, or, you know, had everybody under one roof and we've got an okay. And I think, you know, it's, you know, we have to cut ourselves a bit of slack sometimes. I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to be these superheroes or super mums or mumpreneurs and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, sometimes it's just being kind to yourself and, you know, looking out for yourself and doing all the right things. And I think resilience definitely comes in there. I think the more, for me, you know, the more I've become resilient, the more I look after myself, the more I do daily acts of building resilience to make sure that I'm okay. You know, if change does happen, I feel much more equipped to deal with it. It doesn't make it easier. It doesn't make it, you know, it's still hard. But from a mindset point of view, I feel a lot calmer. And actually, I think sometimes the more kind of adversity you've maybe faced, the better it can be sometimes as well, because you can think, right, you know, I've got through this, I can get through that. So I think failure is good. You know, not talking about failure, but I've just brought up the F word. You know, that can be good, as long as we learn from it, you know. And I've definitely, and I think that's where change comes in. I think sometimes we can, with the patterns of behaviour, we do the same thing over and over again, and we wonder why we get the same results, and we're not changing, but we're not doing anything differently. And I think that's when we get to that point where we go, do you know what? I want to change. I want to do things differently. And then it's learning how to do that, for me. But I wanted to, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Lou.
No, it was just a question that I'm exploring myself, and so I love hearing where you're both coming from. I think the only thing that I would add is that I'm learning to be a bit more empathetic for people who struggle with change, because I think we all come from this school of thought where we know growth happens in times of, you know, adversity and conflict, and you know, we're the types of people who, after lots of different experiences and observations, we can kind of turn things around. And I think so where I come from, one of the reasons why I'm kind of nurturing my empathy for people who struggle with change is because when we are looking at individual change, we're very focused on what does that mean for me, and what we don't realize is what we then do is we've changed the rules for how we engage with the people around us. And Neve, I love your story. If you wanted to share it about what that, you know, an example of what that looks like when you've made a change for yourself. And Marie, I know you have that as well. I think we all have these experiences of when we've wanted to do something really positive for ourselves, but actually we get we don't get the support that we expect from other people. And, you know, what is it about that? What is it about that really personal choice that you've made for yourself, and why does that negatively impact other people? We don't go back and review the social contracts that we have with people. But yeah, if people want to share examples, so yeah, it doesn't look like I'm just talking nonsense, that'd be great.
I mean, I'll start. I think mine's a bit more low level, so I can start. But so 4 years ago I went vegan, which kind of, I was leading up to it happening, so I was vegetarian already, and it was always something I was quite passionate about, and I kind of always knew it was going to happen. But I don't know if there are any vegans watching, but 4 years ago it was not very accessible at all. So eating out wasn't really an option unless I wanted, you know, a bowl of salad and some chips, which was fine because I could get over it. But yeah, I was really excited to make the change because I decided that actually this is something that, you know, going vegetarian was, you know, it made me feel good, and going vegan made me feel even better. And that's when I really started to notice the level of empathy that I had in myself. And it, you know, it was a really, really positive change. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, it was really good for my health. It was really good for my general sort of well-being, because I felt like I was finally sort of doing what I was sort of like acting like how I was preaching. So I was always said like, oh, you know, I love animals, and I won't go into a full vegan rant, but I found it really, really positive. But I started to notice that people around me found it a bit sort of scary and intimidating because they didn't quite know what it was. I mean, it's quite mainstream now, but like 4 or 5 years ago, people didn't really know what I could eat and what I couldn't eat and how I felt about it. You know, there's always been this sort of this stereotypical angry vegan. And to be honest, for a while I probably was that person, because I mean I was still a teenager, so I wasn't, I wasn't that good at handling my emotions just yet. So I probably did annoy some people, but yeah, I sort of just expected that everyone would be like, "Oh, cool, well done," and move on. But I started to notice, like, I wouldn't go out for as many dinners and lunches, and people would kind of avoid planning things around lunch and dinner, and I sort of started noticing these little small changes that I think people probably thought that I wouldn't notice. But it was because they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know if they could eat meat in front of me. They didn't know if I was going to get offended and have a go at them, or they didn't know how that was going to make me feel. And because they didn't know, they just didn't ask. And I had to sort of find myself telling people, like, I know that I've made this change, and it means that how I behave is different from how you behave, but that's fine. I've made this decision for myself. I'm not expecting you to do this. And yeah, I had to constantly reassure people around me that this change doesn't mean that I think you should change. I'll happily talk to you about it for hours, if you want to, but I'm not going to bombard you with stuff if you don't want me to. Which I think a lot of there's a lot of people's fear when it comes to stuff like that. And it doesn't seem like a massive thing, but actually going through that at quite an early stage kind of made me, I think that's why I probably see change as positive, because although there were some negative responses, I was able to then figure out why and kind of turn it around almost. So now, I mean, like quite a lot of my friends don't eat as much, or but they'll ask me for recipes, and they'll talk to me about stuff, and they'll ask me questions, and they find it really interesting. And it's not like a scary aspect of who I am, which feels really nice. And it sounds so minuscule when you talk about the grand scale of things, but that was a massive change for me. And I think that's probably why, yeah, like I said, I now find it so exciting, because I kind of went through the rough stages with other people being a bit scared of it, and came out of it. Yeah, but that's my example.
Thanks.
I think it's funny, isn't it, Neve? I mean, it's interesting. Your story is very similar to mine, but I think what we find sometimes is that other people struggle with our changes, because we've talked about it. People are at different stages, aren't they? And we're ready to change, but other people aren't ready to necessarily go on that change with us, or we become somebody within the group or within a friendship. You fit that identity, you fit that role model, whatever you fit into that group. And then suddenly when you change that, it can be really bizarre for people to kind of get their head around. And my story is I gave up drinking, I gave up alcohol, because I wasn't making me a very nice person, I wasn't being very productive, and it was killing me, if I'm honest. And when I sort of started telling people, that I'm not drinking, or to start with, I didn't kind of say too much. I literally didn't go out. I had to kind of change my behaviour, not go to pubs, just do something very different. I think that's where I was talking about before, is having that planning. If you're not going to go out after work for a drink, what are you going to do? And you shift your behaviour, and you shift your pattern. But actually, telling people, it was really difficult, and it made me feel quite weird about the whole experience as well. I would be like, God, why are people not excited for me? I'm not going out and drinking myself to death, and I'm not gonna have blackouts and not know where how I've got home and things like that. And I just thought people would be happy for me. But it was very interesting. A lot of friends or family were, God, I'm not going to invite you out now because you're really boring because you're not drinking, and that made me feel awful. And and you do start thinking that, and you start doubting yourself, and I think you have to kind of really push through that. And I think actually one of the hardest things for me was my relationship with my dad. He wasn't a big drinker, but our thing was, if I went round, or I'd be like, oh Dad, I'll make you a gin and tonic, and we'd have a gin and tonic. Or if we were going out for dinner, we'd share a bottle of wine and things like that. And because I wasn't doing that, it was really hard, because I felt like I lost that relationship with my dad, because I wasn't replacing it with anything. We just weren't doing it anymore. And that was really, really hard. And then until, it was like, okay, Dad, do you want to go out for a coffee? Do you want to do something different? And, and I've definitely lost friends along the way because of it, because I changed and they didn't want to change. They wanted to still go out to the pub. They still wanted to have fun. They still wanted to do this other stuff. And it was like, do you know what, I'm out. I can't do that anymore. And I think, you know, your goals and your why and your purpose has to be big enough, doesn't it, to work through that. And again, similar to you, you know, I think you'd go out and sit in a pub and not have a drink, and people would be quite embarrassed. You know, they didn't want to have a drink in front of you, or would be like, oh, is it all right if I have another drink? Or they'd think you're judging them, you know, that they're having too much to drink. And it's like, you know, you do what you want to do. You know, you're in charge of your life, and I'll stay in charge of my life. And it becomes a very awkward situation. That does pass, and it does get better, but it's really, really hard. And like I'm saying, you know, sustaining that, and not kind of, you know, collapsing into sort of peer pressure, or, you know, losing those relationships. That's why sometimes change is hard, because it's not just about you, it is about other people, and you become that identity. I was definitely that person within my family that was, you know, having fun and the fun person, and it's like when you stop doing that, but then you just change, and then they realised that I was becoming better. I actually was still quite funny. You know, not really, but do you know what I mean? I could be funny in other ways. I didn't need to have a drink to sort of, you know, have a laugh. And they sort of came around, but it takes time. It really takes time. And I think that's the really hardest thing to see, you know, when you're at that point, when you're like, I want to change, you know, it's going to be hard. And I think from a mindset point of view, you have to be ready, and you have to be ready potentially to have those awkward conversations, or, you know, lose friends maybe along with it. But know that deep down, you know, you're doing it because it will make you a better person.
Yeah, I think that's just really quickly going to pick up on that knowing that you're doing what's good for you. So when I spoke about this, I didn't go to uni straight away, so I went straight into a job, but quite a lot of my friends did. They went to university, and some of them stayed local, so, you know, they were doing freshers, and they were going out, but I was starting a whole new career. So I couldn't do that. I couldn't go out on a Wednesday and, you know, act like a uni student, because I wasn't. But that was really difficult, because I found myself, and I talk a lot about young people in, you know, that are starting their career, but I'm sure it's something that a lot of people will sort of recognize that's happened to them as well, that I couldn't do those things. And, you know, my friends were going out and doing these things, and, you know, I could tag along for a few and you know, be realistic about it, but I was working 9 to 5 every day, so I couldn't behave the way they were, which was absolutely fine. I was really happy for them, you know, and they were happy for me, but I still lost those friendships, because I couldn't be there. I couldn't see them, and it got to the point where I was, you know, like asking and questioning myself, you know, did I do the right thing? Like, should I be doing this? Like, why did I jump straight into my career? And it was that always knowing that I did this because this is what's best for me. And, you know, I got my degree in another way, but it's that knowing that, you know, no matter what everyone else is doing around you, I've made this decision, and I've, you know, made this change. I've, you know, left education and gone into a job because that's what I wanted to do. And when that change happens, I mean, you picked up on it, Marie, it can be really hard to stick to if people around you aren't being supportive. And if, you know, if the environment you're in isn't quite nurturing that change the way you thought they would, yeah, it can be really, really difficult. But I found myself the first couple of months anyway, definitely sort of reassuring myself, like, you've done the right thing, don't worry, like, this will pass. And it did. I'm still friends with those people, you know, they just have a lot more funny club stories than I do, but it's fine.
They're overrated.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to add that on, because I thought that yeah, showed quite nicely what you were saying.
I think I was just, Lou, if that's all right, I just ask you, because I know you're class yourself as a recovering workaholic, and I suppose for you, I don't know if you've kind of been in a job, left, you know, got well, and then gone back into that same job, but how have you kind of managed your change of how you conduct yourself differently in the work that you do? I know you work for yourself as well, and you work with clients, so how have you, I suppose, implemented that change for the best for yourself?
Yeah, it is difficult, and actually because of this new path that I'm on, and get to geek out and be a student and study myself, you know, study again, I've kind of really learned more about being able to identify when change has happened, particularly change that I've chosen, that the types of responses that I might get from people might not be how I expect them to be, and that's okay, because that's their stuff, not mine. So one of my earlier burnouts was after I had left my first marriage. And I had this whole identity that had always felt like an uncomfortable fit, because the role that I was expected to play from my family, from my ex-husband, was to be to be a mother and to be a housewife. And those of you who know me will know that none of those things really fit me. I like to feed people, and that's kind of about it. And being able to turn around and it was an amicable split, and the biggest discomfort that I had came from my own family. And they told me how disappointed they were, how angry they were that I had chosen, in their words, I'd chosen my career over my family life. And for a long time that then reinforced, that reinforced my workaholism, because I believed their story. I could only have one or the other. And actually now I'm much more in harmony with, okay, I know the reasons why that response came from those people, and that's the world that they know. There's a whole load of other opportunities. And so it was being able to free myself from feeling stuck in roles that didn't fit me, to play parts that weren't for me to play. And it's really scary, and really difficult, and all of the things that you wonderful women have talked about. And so that's kind of where I come from when we talk about change can be good and bad at the same time, because I think what we do is, when we make a choice, we inadvertently close the door on something else, and that door that you close might be for the best, but for the people who have invested in that identity of yours, that is an unintentional change that they're experiencing. And so they suffer this loss. We suffer the loss of those relationships if it comes to that point, or we suffer we grieve that relationship can't be the same anymore. And so if I'm going to kind of use a smaller example that might be a bit more relatable to everybody, I think we've had that when we've moved jobs, and we know that we're moving on to a better job. Either it's sideways or an upwards move, or just a different environment, but we're really excited about the new job. But if you're lucky enough to be leaving an environment that you felt nurtured and supportive, and you have your work family, you are sad because you're leaving those people behind. You're moving on from that next chapter. And so I think in order to kind of build that resilience for ourselves, and to be and to practice that empathy, which then that results in us being able to be kinder to ourselves, it's being able to go, there's lots of different things in play, and all of that is okay. And some people might get it later down the line, they might not. FOMO is an absolute nightmare for all of us. And if that fear of missing out, we want to be involved in everything, and actually we just can't, because then we spread ourselves too thin and we can't live as the authentic self that we want to. And so if we can kind of just work out going, you're angry because that's your issue, not because of something I've done, then that's fine. Like I can love you and support you for that, and it's not about me. I think so much change we take personally, and so much of that is just because if we've changed the rules, it's just giving them time to catch up and work through their stuff, and trust that it will be okay in the end, regardless of whether those people are in your life or not, or whether that circumstance is in your life or not. But yeah, I think that's part of the beauty of moving on, and the scary thing, because if we're, the argument is, if we're constantly moving, then how do you, who are you? If you're constantly changing and evolving, then are you the same person? And so the work that I love doing with clients is work out who that core person is. What are the personalities, what are the traits that are always going to be part of you, and that's your anchor. So maybe that's why we're not as scared of change, because we've all had lots of opportunities to do that work. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you both. So just as you were talking now, I started kind of thinking, when you both spoken about quite large changes in your personal life, and people reacted differently to it. They might not have reacted the way you hoped, or in the best scenario. I imagine after that you found yourself explaining yourself quite a lot, so you felt like you had to keep telling people why you did this. And part of me can see why that would be a good thing, because like you said, Liv, people are around you are having to deal with this change as well. So it's a change for them as well. It's not just you that's changing. Their relationship with you, the version of you that they're used to is changing. So they're going to have questions and they're going to want to. But then I can also see that being really negative, because then naturally, if you keep thinking, I've got to explain this, people don't understand, you're going to start questioning it and thinking, like Marie touched upon, like, is this sustainable? Like, have I made the right decision? I just wanted to ask you both, if it's okay, did you find yourself explaining yourself, and do you think that made a difference in how you handled the change? Did it make you feel a bit more comfortable, a bit less comfortable with it?
I think for me, I think it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I think I wanted people to think, well, that's what you're doing, we'll back you, we'll support you. I was quite surprised that I didn't have that, probably like what you said, Neve, quite surprised everybody be like, not like going, oh my God, wow, that's amazing. And I think it wasn't until, and at the time I was just like, oh my God, they don't get it. And it's not until you work through it and then you look back on it maybe and have that reflection that I was like, I get it, because it wasn't just about me, like I said before. And, some people aren't ready to go with you on that change. And you are. And I think sometimes people are worried that they're going to get left behind. If you are going to go, that's why you do have some relationships sometimes where they kind of sabotage each other trying to get better, because they don't want then that person to get better, and they then have to match that standard. They've got to come out of their comfort zone and do some work. So I think that's really, really hard. And I think as well, sometimes by you saying I'm going to make some changes and I want to be better, it makes other people feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable, because maybe they know that that's what they should do. I was, sometimes when I was saying to people, well, that's great, I've been sober for 3 months, or I've done this and done that, people would just be like, oh, thanks for that. I'm trying to do it myself, or I'm trying to lose weight, or I haven't done this and haven't done that. And it's like, you're not saying it to be boastful. You're saying it because, you're just sharing, your growth and your development and, your happiness, really. So I think I was really shocked by the different opinions and different judgments, where I thought it would just literally everyone was like, wow. I remember when I gave up smoking, and I got in touch with an old uni friend, and we used fashion degree, and smoking all the time, and it was quite cool and all this kind of stuff. And then I remember we met up, and years later, and he said, oh, you've stopped smoking? And I was like, yeah. And he was just like, oh. And it was just very odd, and part of me was like, oh, would you not, I've given up smoking because I'm not going to kill myself and I'm going to be better. And it was just because I didn't play that role. I didn't play that part anymore. We would go out, we'd smoke, have a drink, have a laugh. And because I wasn't fitting that bill anymore and playing that part and playing that role, he didn't like it. So, and again, you become a mirror. I think you become a mirror of what other people what they could look like and what they could have. And some people aren't ready for that, and they don't want that, or they're very disengaged from that, so they will depart themselves from that. So yeah, it's very interesting, but it's never detracted me from wanting to achieve that change. I think my urge and I wanted to make something better of myself, and I was like, if you're going to come with me, great. If you're not, great. I think you have to be quite strong-minded like that, and probably get real tough skin. I was quite emotional to start with, where I couldn't understand. But yeah, I definitely got a bit of a tougher skin, and you appreciate, and I've made new friends, and I've made new associates and things like that, and that's brilliant, because they're there to help you and support you, and you know, encourage you and embrace it. So yeah, that's brilliant. What about yourself, Lou?
I think there's something really poignant in your question, Neve, that I love, which is how much other people can influence, and even if we're sure, the ability that we give people to derail us. And I think I think when I'm really optimistic is being able to hear people out and try and work out whether it's a concern or not. Because if people love you and they're invested in you, they want what they think is best for you. And if you can identify that actually maybe what they think is best for you is actually what's best for them, and that type of advice or pressure then doesn't become as helpful for what I want out of my life, for example. And so yeah, kind of being able to just to get out of your own head a little bit, and it's not to say that, you know, you kind of give everybody the excuse. It's just being able to see how they might see the world, or how they might see this change that you've introduced from their point of view. Because if nothing else, it means that you can be a bit kinder to yourself, without ignoring potentially really important feedback. Because we, you know, if we only move towards those circles that nurture and embrace us, we then live in this bubble where we're not challenged. We might be a bit happier, but we stay stale. You know, if those of us in particular who love change will always want to look for people who will help us do that, whether that is by support or challenge or both. And so I think when you are undergoing that, it's being able to look at what information is available to you and go, okay, is this about helping me? Is this about helping them? And what can I use from that to help me? So we can just take it a bit easy, because I think when we've talked about how change is really difficult and how the different ways it can impact you, especially when it comes to maintaining, like the decision to make the change, in some cases is the easy bit. It's the practical bits afterwards. And actually I can see how that scales up in terms of organizations as well. So if we're saying that, you know, having to constantly talk and explain away why we're making these changes from a personal point of view might be, for me, I get to the point where I go, I've done this enough times now. You are now on a different journey to me. So maybe it's time for us to part ways or take a break. So one of the things that I did was that I took a break from my family after my separation and my divorce, because they needed something from me that I couldn't give them, and I couldn't give them what they needed from me. So we took some time out to re-establish what this new relationship looked like. From a business point of view, if you're having supported many a staffing structure in my past lives, that communication can help, because all change, if you know, we're under the assumption that all change we take personally, right? And so whenever anyone hears restructure, they hear I'm going to lose my job, I'm not good enough, they're trying to get rid of me. And so some of that dialogue, again, if it's helpful, what you don't want to do is you don't want to keep fueling insecurities by not having the right communications and the right values going through it. But it is about, let's separate these two issues. One issue is what we need for the company, and whatever reasons that motivates the change in structure or process. The other hand is, how are you feeling about it personally? They're two different things.
And I think just
No,
I think that's brilliant. And actually, just to add to that, is it's very hard, you know, when you go from being quite selfless, because it's almost like change can be quite selfish, can't it? And you're doing it for yourself, and that's really hard when you're not used to putting yourself first. It's really hard. There's many times, you know, I would, you know, nearly give in to stuff because you're thinking about other people's emotions and thinking about what they want and how you could make it better for them, and it's really hard to keep the focus back and go, no, it has to be about me. And I think, again, going back to, we think, sort of caring for ourselves it's not about self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, isn't it? And I think it's okay to have a bit of selfishness. It's something we're told that we should never do because we all need to think about others, and I think, but sometimes you have to think about yourself and be kind to yourself and think it has to be about me. If the change it needs to happen and you want it to happen, there's that desire for it to happen, then I think you need to, like you were saying, you took some time out from your family, Lou. I think it was good to do that. You had to do that to almost reconfirm to yourself that was the right thing to do and get your head round what you were doing and the choices you were making. Very brave.
Yeah. I think we've all had that kind of experience. I love the fact that you two are always so willing to share your stories. So I would love to hear some of the stories from people who are listening, because
absolutely,
being able to normalize the fact that change is hard for you and for the people around you, and within your company. We know change is good, we know change is hard, but yeah, my own agenda in this episode is, can we talk more about when social contracts change? Because we never address that. We go through this is the process, these are the responsibilities, this is who does what, but how we see one another can, that's the big stuff. That's the stuff that really hurts and hits home.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the just before we end, I thought that was a beautiful place to end, but I've just got one quick last question that I want to throw at you both. One thing we spoke about a lot is resilience, and we've talked about it in other episodes, and it's something that everyone's acknowledged that it's a really sort of important skill to have, especially when you're facing these big changes. And this might be a bit of a personal question, so don't feel obliged to answer it, but I think when we think about resilience, people think, it's a lovely idea, but how do I do it? How do I get there? And I'm not asking for, your go-to list, but is there anything, even just small little personal things that you think people can do? Because I know, people self-care in different ways, don't they? People sort of give themselves a break in different ways, but is there anything that, in the workplace that people can offer, or even just like little prompts or anything like that people can do to just sort of help them get to that next step?
I'm trying to what to think and nail it in a nutshell. I think
a good question. I appreciate that.
I think on a daily basis, I think resilience it's about bouncing back from challenges, isn't it? So I think it's the self-belief that you will bounce back from challenges, and I think that's the thing. I think for me, I always say that you're stronger than you think. Give yourself some credit. And I think sometimes when we're faced with change, we can automatically just panic, especially if we don't feel like it's good change. But I think it's taking a step back and looking at it and thinking, okay, well, how will this impact me? Will it make my life better? If it doesn't make my life better, what can I do to try and make my life better? I think it's really taking a step back and really thinking about it, because I think that's kind of where the resilience comes from, is giving yourself that space to go from sort of panic to kind of have a bit of space to take it all in rather than get overwhelmed, in a nutshell for me.
I find a metaphor particularly helpful when it comes to resilience, because I think because it's such a buzzword at the moment, people have got so many different impressions of it. And so, the impression that I'm getting from people that I speak to is resilience means strength, and it's actually the opposite. For me, it's a squash ball, right? If it was too firm, if it was too hard, it becomes fragile, and it wouldn't go anywhere, or it would smash and shatter. But actually, it's that ability to be able to, whatever pressure you're hitting something, your shape changes slightly to move in different directions. And so it's this idea that you have enough of a core that you are a whole, but you are flexible enough that it doesn't matter if you change shape slightly, because if the environment around you is different, you adapt in that way. And so for me, imagining that as resilience means that the really practical stuff, like being kind to yourself and being kind to other people, that allows you to be a bit kinder to yourself. And ironically, some of it is just letting go some of the stuff. Like, you know, when we're in this fear or threat space, what we want to do is we automatically want to hold on. We want to, you know, knuckle down and put the defenses up. And what we do is we build this hard shell that if we knew we threw across the wall, that would smash. And so, yeah, I think how we misinterpret what resilience means sometimes. So hopefully that metaphor can help people work out what that self-care looks like for them.
Yeah, definitely. Unless you have anything to add to that, Marie, I think that's a really lovely metaphor to end on. Actually, I think that ties it up really well. So I don't think we've got any questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Marie?
No, I thought that's all brilliant. Again, if anybody wants to get in touch or send us any questions, or, you know, what does resilience mean to you? Anyone listening out there, it would be great to find out, because it means something very different to everybody, a bit like we talk about other subjects and change. So yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so thank you to everyone that watched us live, to anyone that's listening in the future at some point. We hope you enjoyed it. And in a minute, a screen will pop up with an email address that you can talk to, so you can let us know what you think about this. If there's anything that you want to talk to us about and you want us to talk about in our future episodes, then yeah, let us know. We'd love to chat. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.